Today's Conceptually Speaking, we're going to be talking about dice probability, specifically as it relates to things like role-playing games. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Conceptually Speaking, and welcome to all you new folks who stumbled upon this. And today we're going to be talking about dice probability as it relates to games such as RPGs. And just a little side technical note, this is actually a reshoot, and I suppose if I get enough comments, you guys can see the blooper-filled other version at some point, where you can see what happens whenever you try to record something involving lots of math while you're really tired. It doesn't work. So, here we go again. We're going to start with, this was originally going to be about 2d6s. And that's where the original idea I had a while ago came from. However, one of our comments mentioned that they had heard that originally Dungeons & Dragons was going to use 2d10s as opposed to a d20. And so once I get done talking about the d6s, I want to talk about that as well and explain how that would make things different. Obviously, once I get done talking about with the d6s, you're going to hopefully have an idea of where everything's going with the d10s. But if not, keep watching, because here goes. So with a single d6, and to be clear on the off chance you don't know what I mean, a d6 is a six-sided die. Die is the singular of dice. So a d12 is a 12-sided die, a d20 is a 20-sided die, and so on. So with a single d6, the probability is very simple. For any given number, it's 1 in 6, because there are 6 sides, one of them is going to land face up. So it's real simple. Now, and as a note, most of what I'm going to be talking about is for a specific result, not a number or higher or lower or something like those. That's different probability. And I will mention that towards the end, but this is about specific results. So what that means is there's an equal chance of a 1 or a 4 or a 6 or 3 or 5, what have you. So that's very straightforward. However, when you get to 2d6s, things change dramatically. As you can see with my hopefully visible chart here. So the first thing is, and this is trying to compare this to a d12, which is a real thing. So with 2d6s, first of all, you can't roll a 1 because the lowest number you're going to roll is a 2. So that's a key difference between that and a d12 right off the bat. But also, these represent the progression. This is the dice combinations that make a 2. This is how you make a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, and an 8. And if this were to continue, this would be sloping back downwards. So this makes a bell curve, essentially. And you'll note that what that means is 7 is the most likely number to appear. And there are 6 possible combinations. Now, to briefly explain this here, because I have actually run into a problem explaining this to someone before that was fairly intelligent, and I don't know if I was just explaining it wrong or they just didn't get it, but note, this roll of 6 and 1 here at the top is not the same as this roll of 1 and 6 at the bottom. They're the same result, but this is a column A, column B situation. Okay, yes, there is a 6 and a 1 in both of them, but it's the die A is a 6 here, whereas B is a 1 here. Mathematically, for odds purposes, that is different from die A being a 1, die B being a 6. Those are different things, okay? But you'll also notice in some of these, like the 3-3 doesn't repeat because they're both 3s. So even if you reverse it, they're still both 3s. It's still just the one roll. So what that means is, because of this kind of thing, with 2d6s, there are 36 possible combinations. Okay, and mathematically that's easy to come by because you have one d6 has 6 sides, so does the second d6, Well, each of the 6 sides on the second one will correspond to one of the ones on the first one. So for possible outcomes, if you have a 1 here, you're going to go through the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and the 6. That's 6 possible rolls before you move on to the 2, and so on and so on. So essentially you multiply the number of sides. And this continues on, like if you were to add a third die, it would be 1 in 216 for any specific result. So, what this means is, you have, like I said, the bell curve shape, with 7 being the most prominent one. And it means that your outliers, your 2 and your 12, are a 1 in 36 possible that they're going to hit. Whereas the 7, there are 6 combinations. So with 36 possibilities, that's 6 in 36 or 1 in 6. Alright? So then you can have also your 12-sided die. Now immediately the difference is you can roll a 1 on a 12-sided die, whereas you can't here.
Explain why that is, Bob.
Well,
it's obvious, but
yeah. Well, I mean the difference is because you have to roll both dice, and the lowest number is 1, not 0. So it's a combination. So whereas here it's a 12-sided die, so there have to be 12 numbers on it. So that's where you get that. And this is significant because, well, 1, you literally can't roll it with 2d6s, but also because of the way this is set up. Just like a D6, here, any given number has an equal probability of showing up as any other number. So, you have an equal probability of any of the numbers showing up on the D12. So, a 1 and a 12 are at 1 in 12, whereas with the D6s, they're 1 in 36. But on the flip side, your 7, your middle number, goes from being 1 in 6 to 1 in 12. The probability on this is it's a straight line. Okay, there's no curve like there is with these. So, what that means for any given game you're playing, it depends on what kind of results you're after. So, like, say you are playing D&D, and you have a choice between a weapon that does 2d6s versus a d12 in damage. Do you want consistent damage that can never be below a 2, in which case you're going to prefer the 2d6? Or do you want the better chance of getting the 12, the maximum damage? There you're going to want the d12, because the odds are more in your favor of rolling the 12. Same as rolling anything else. So it's a matter of, do you want the extreme odds or do you want the center? That's how it impacts things like D&D, as far as your choices as the game stands right now that you could possibly make. Now, to the comment we got for the other video, however, what this will do is on a D20, there's, the numbers 1 through 20. So there's a 5% chance for any given number to come up. It's 1 in 20. Well, if you were to swap that for 2 D10s, you're going to change the probability, and it's going to look more like this, with, should be the 10 or the 11 in the center. And because, as with the other, you're going to eliminate the 1, because the lowest you can roll is a 2, and then the highest you can roll is a 20. And I think had they gone with 2 D10s, these dice would actually have a 1 to designate these as the 10, because that's what they're supposed to be, because they're percentile dice. But I think they would actually go ahead and do that, because this would be the more frequent use for them. But for the moment, you just have to bear with me. The 0 does represent a 10 here. The percentile die?
yeah.
Well, on here, this is the other part of the percentile die. It's a double 0. So with using these 2 dice together, you're supposed to be able to roll to see a percentage. This represents 100%. Whereas this represents 1%. So, but anyway, what this would do is, this would create a curve effect, so that the bulk of your rolls are going to be more towards the middle, which again is going to probably hover around 11. And your 1 and your 20 are going to go from a 5% chance to a 1% chance, because 2d10s have 100 different combinations as opposed to 20. So, and also you're eliminating the 1 altogether. It becomes a 2. And presumably 2 would become the critical failure number under this other system. So, that would change the game, in my opinion, all other things being equal. Your skills and the points you put into them would probably become more important, because there's less of a chance of you knocking it out of the park with that 20, and your rolls are going to be more towards the middle, so you have to take that into account. And so that would have definitely changed the game in the early phases, had they gone with the 2d10s as opposed to the d20. So I don't know, it's impossible to extrapolate from there where we'd be now, because they might have switched to a d20 at some point. They might have just compensated for it to make the game exactly how it is now, just with 2 d10s as opposed to a 20, but changed something else to compensate. So it's impossible to really get into that. But this would affect many other games, like the d6s would definitely affect games like HeroClix, where you use 2 d6s. The equivalent of a critical hit there is 2 d6s, is 2 6s, and the equivalent of a critical miss is 2 1s. Whereas if you're using a 12-sided die, now it's going to be a 1 and a 12, presumably, but the odds of those things happening are going to increase quite a bit, 3 times over, I believe, from 1 and 36 to 1 and 12. So it would change the math behind the game quite a bit. You would see far more critical hits, well, roughly 3 times more critical hits and critical failures, which would cause the game to be a little more swingy, in my opinion. But, that's why you use the 2d6s. You focus more in the center, so you have a much better... So the others become truly unique events, true outliers. But, you are still dealing with dice, and whenever I say things like, oh, it's more likely to get a 7, understand that I'm talking across 1,000 rolls for probability to truly play itself out. 10 rolls in a row, you could have 10 12s in a row. It's a statistical anomaly, but it could happen. It is within the realm of possibility. But you go across 1,000 rolls, it's going to start leveling itself out at some point, as long as you don't have rigged dice, which are illegal in most states. So that's basically how you figure out probability with dice. Like I said, when you're using multiple dice, you just take the number of sides and you multiply them out, and that's how many possibilities you're going to have. Your outliers, or your 2 ends, are going to be 1 in whatever number you came up with, and then your focus is going to be in the middle. So by using multiple dice over a single die, you're creating a bell curve versus a flat graph. So that's the basics of dice probability for you. So hopefully some of you found this far more informative than your math classes you possibly slept through. Hopefully my visual aid is better than in the...
No, that really helped me.
The failed attempt that I made in the other video.
I don't grasp maths well. It's just not my thing. The previous video, TI-85 against the wall several times. Several different TI-85s, by the way. They're not built to go against walls.
No.
But your visual aids there helped me a lot in understanding. So A, thank you. And B, where do you lie on the 1 versus 2 die thing?
Oh, the D10 versus the 20?
Yeah.
I think I don't see where one is superior to the other, but they would lead to different games. I think the two would lead to the two would lead to more, okay, I expect X, Y, and Z to happen, and less, oh, well, I've only got this long shot of a chance, I may as well take it. That would happen, well, that particular part of that would still happen, but the result being positive would happen less. Yeah, with 2 dice, it becomes less likely.
Right. With 1 die, it's more likely to get the ends.
So for the sake of the game and being exciting, the D20 is the better choice.
But it's much better for the narrative.
Because it gives you that oh damn, kind of
the big moments, the big fails or the big wins.
Yeah, from a if you were playing, if it were a game where winning and losing were actually concepts that mattered, I would probably favor the 2 dice because it's more predictable, it's easier to plan for, it's less swingy.
It's more like playing blackjack.
Yes, actually, that's a whole other video, folks. But suffice to say, don't let anyone fool you. Figuring out probability in blackjack is exceptionally simple if you know anything about math. Counting cards is hard. Well, no, actually, counting cards is not hard. Keeping track of cards in a casino is hard. Counting cards is fairly easy. The number of decks, that's to make it so that the odds are perpetually in the house's favor. That's not to make it harder to count the cards. Because the more decks there are, just very briefly, the more decks there are, the goal you're shooting for is to know when there are either a lot of face cards or a whole lot of not face cards. You need to know that's your goal in counting. You want the lot of face cards into the deck because that's your greater chance you're going to start getting 21s. That's when you want to bet more heavily and take more risks. I think. I'm not an expert at counting cards. But the other can also inform your bets. And with the multiple decks like they use, it takes a long time to get to that point because it really only happens with any kind of real definitive answer towards the end of the shoe. That's what they call all the decks together. So the more decks there are, the longer it takes to get to that point, the more they're going to bleed you dry. And, so it's not to make it more difficult to count the cards. It has nothing at all to do with that. So.
And this has been your primer on probabilities.
Yeah. So, I could briefly take 2 minutes and explain the whole card thing. It's real simple. There's 52 cards in the deck. There are 4 suits. There are 13 cards in each suit. So for any given card, a jack, for instance, that means there are 4 of them. Okay? Across 52 cards, it's a 1 in 13 probability of any specific card coming up from a new deck that hasn't been touched yet. Now,
a new single deck.
New single deck. Well, actually, you can stack 10 decks and it's still going to be the same probability.
Well, same probability with the numbers change.
Yeah.
The 4 out of 52.
Yeah. So that's why I say the math's relatively easy. Then what you're shooting for is a value. And there, a 10, a jack, a queen, and a king are all worth 10 in blackjack. So 4 of the 13 cards, or roughly, but not quite, 1/3 of the cards. That's why when you're looking at the dealer's card, you generally assume his down card is a 10 because that is the card that is most likely to be there. So, there you go. By the way, don't take any of that as gambling advice. I'm not any kind of official gambling advice kind of person. That's just things I've done in a casino before. So that's not monetary advice or legal advice or health advice or any of those kinds of advice. I'm just talking about dice as it relates to non-gambling games. Because he
didn't tell you whether or not he had any success at those times at the casino.
Yes, well, that, and I have no idea what the liability is if I sit here and ramble on and someone's like, yeah, but this guy on YouTube told me to do this, so I'm not telling you to do anything. So
he's telling you not to count cards in the casino. It's not against the law, but they will ban you.
Yes, that's an important distinction. It is not illegal, but if they know you're doing it, they will ban you. And they have the right to do that because they can serve, it's a serve whoever they want to serve kind of deal. So,
and they don't want to serve you if you're counting cards and winning.
Yeah, and supposedly back in the day they'd break your hand first, but that's where the mob controlled everything. So they say. I don't know. Don't come after me, mob guys. I don't know. I'm not saying anything.
And Joe Pesci knocks on the door.
Yeah. Yeah, well, luckily if that happens, I think I can take him. I'm like 2 feet taller than him.
And he's like 80 now.
Yeah, well, that too. But yeah, so that's been dice probability. Hopefully we answered any potential questions you'd have about D6s and how they all interact, and brought up what the person in the comments said. So this will hopefully also demonstrate that, you guys leave comments, like we do take them into account. So, yeah. And one of these days we might try playing a one-off game of D&D with the other system and see what happens.
We need to do that anyway because of the playtest stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, folks, thank you again for watching. You know, if there's any kind of videos like this you want to see, shoot us a message. We'll see what we can do. But yep, you know, share it around, make some comments, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But thank you for watching, and we will see you later.